Okay, good afternoon. Good morning if you live in another time zone. For India and Italy, good afternoon, I think, is fine. And welcome to the 10th webinar of the series Journey Through Contemporary India, Dialogues with Experts, organized by the Center for Studies on International Politics, the Observatory on India. Today, we will discuss a very important topic, India's global value chains participation, a comparative analysis across sectors. The paper will be presented by Anwesha Basu, who is assistant professor in the Department of Economics at Flame University in Pune, India. She had obtained her doctorate degree in economics from Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research in Mumbai. Her research lies in international trade, trade and labor markets, trade policies in India, and industrial development. Prior to joining Flame University, he had worked as a consultant in foreign trade policy in the Department of Commerce, Ministry of Commerce and Industry of the Government of India. She has received her MA degree in economics from the Delhi School of Economics, University of Delhi, and a bachelor's degree in economics from Jadavpur University in Kolkata. Co-authors of this paper are Partha Sen, who is Professor Emeritus of Economics at the Delhi School of Economics. Partha obtained his PhD at the London School of Economics. He was a professor reader in economics at the Delhi School of Economics, director of the Delhi School of Economics, and he also had full-time appointments at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, the London School of Economics, and the University of Bristol. He was the editor of the Indian Economic Review. His areas of interest are microeconomics, international economics, and environmental economics. He's a member of the CESPI Munich Research Network and a member of the steering committee of our Observatory on India. The other co-author is Pasquale Scaramuzzino, who is professor at the Finance University of Rome Tor Vergata, and emeritus professor at University of London. He has a PhD in economics from the London School of Economics and Political Science. He has been professor of economics, School of Finance Management, University of London, lecturer, a senior lecturer and reader in economics at the Source University. Also at the Department of Economics at the University College London, and at the University of Bristol, and has been research assistant at the Center for Labor Economics at the London School of Economics and Political Science. He is also a member of our steering committee. The discussant is Alessandro Borin. Alessandro is head in the emerging markets and world trade division of the Bank of Italy. He holds a PhD in international economics from Tor Vergata University in Rome. His main research interests focus on international trade, foreign direct investment, global value chains, and firm performance. He has authored also articles about the China's economy, commodity markets, and economic forecasting, and the economic of COVID-19. So the paper is very rich, very important. It described the positioning of India in the global value chains by sectors, and of course analyzed the role of China, compare with Vietnam, and also say something on the perspective. It's very important. India positioning in the world scene depends on many factors, but of course the economic development and strength are a very important factor. Please post your questions on the Q&A chat box you find in your Zoom bar. The speaker has, as usual, 20 minutes, 10 minutes for the discussant, and when we turn to the question of the audience. So, Anwesha, the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much. So I'll straight away get into the presentation. So the title of today's talk is India's GVC Participation, a Comparative Analysis Across Sectors. So it is important to understand why GVCs matter, which is the motivation of our study. So in the last 3 or 4 decades, it is well known that there has been a fragmentation of global trade and production. So instead of a single product being produced from top to bottom in a particular country, production processes due to global value chains have been broken down such that different parts of the production process takes place in different countries, and each country specializes in a particular part of this production process. And due to this fragmented nature of global trade, it is not only important as to what countries trade, but also how countries trade, which brings us to backward and forward linkages. So backward and to understand what is backward and what is forward linkage, we can take the oft-cited example of an iPhone, where if you think of an iPhone, the assembly activity of an iPhone is done in countries like India and China, where India is importing different parts and components, like say the camera is imported from Japan, the semiconductor chip is imported from Taiwan, and all of these parts and components are imported and then assembled in India, and then we are exporting it to other countries. So this captures the forward linkage or the forward GVC, this captures the backward linkage or the backward GVC participation. On the other hand, the forward linkage you can think of from the point of view of Taiwan. So Taiwan is exporting the semiconductor chip to India, which is being assembled into the iPhone, and then it is being re-exported. So this captures the forward linkage, which is the domestic value added that is captured in exports that are further re-exported by partner countries. Now, China, it has been well documented that China has been vacating the lower end of this manufacturing space, and Vietnam is taking up a little bit of this space by deepening its backward linkages. However, despite being well positioned in terms of having a large, unskilled, cheap labor force, India's integration into global supply chains, particularly in its backward linkages, has remained limited, as has been shown in several studies. And therefore, the concerns that India faces are the stagnant manufacturing share of GDP and high import dependence on China, which has raised geopolitical concerns. So this is reflected in this graph here, where in panel A, we have plotted India, China, and Vietnam's country-wise share of gross output in global output in total manufacturing. And we see that India and China's share is nowhere comparable, because I have had to plot China on a separate secondary axis altogether. So China's share is 35% in the latest year for which this data is available, as opposed to India's share of less than 3.5% of global production. And this is also reflected in panel B, where we have plotted the share in world merchandise exports for these three countries, where for China, the share is 14% for the year 2024, and India captures less than 2% of world merchandise exports. Vietnam, which is a much smaller country as compared to India, is very close to India's share, almost close to 1.7%. Now, against this backdrop, we examine the trends and patterns of India's sectoral GVC participation in selected industries. In particular, we focus on labor-intensive sectors like textiles, wearing apparels, and leather. These are sectors which provide employment to India's vast population, and traditionally we have had comparative advantage in these sectors. And also, we look at network products like electronics, electrical, optical products, machinery, transport equipments. These are sectors where GVCs are ubiquitous. We conduct a comparative analysis with key competitor countries. To do so, we use updated and novel measures of GVC participation, which has been which has been talked about in the seminal study by our esteemed discussant here, along with his co-authors in their 2021 paper. We are going to talk more about these measures of GVC participation soon, but it basically enables us to provide a sector-by-sector assessment of India's position in the initial, middle, as well as the final stages of global production networks. And finally, we analyze the determinants of sectoral GVC participation for Indian industries in a panel data framework. And in particular, we look at the role of tariffs, exchange rates, and broadly the role of industrial policy. So the data that we have sourced are from multiple data sources. We have used OECD's TIBA database. We have used the GVC indicators, as I've already mentioned, by Borin et al. From the ADB key indicators database. Trade data has been sourced, tariff and import data has been sourced from UNCTAD Trains, from the WITS website. For our regression analysis, we have used India claims data to get information on sectoral level variables like employment and capital and value added for India's industries from Reserve Bank of India database. And because we have used multiple databases, we have also had to come up with concordance between these different industrial classifications across the different data sets to create a consistent set of panels of industries across multiple years. So a little bit about the GVC indicator. So the reason why we have used this paper and why it is novel, the paper introduces a novel three-part decomposition of GVC measures, where we just don't have pure forward GVC trade and pure backward GVC trade, but we also have a two-sided GVC trade, and this enables us to study the positioning of the sector along the entire production process from the initial to the final stages. So the pure forward GVC trade, as we have already discussed, talks about the upstream or the initial stage of production. The pure backward GVC trade, which is the foreign value added embodied in gross exports, looks at the downstream end of the value chain. And the two-sided GVC trade, which the authors in the paper talk about, is the midstream position. So it is neither pure forward nor pure backward, but somewhere in between, when sectors are importing foreign intermediates and exporting goods that are again used in the partner countries' exports. So using these three measures, we look at the trends and patterns of India's GVC participation in the following slides. So in the interest of time, we are going to focus only on the trends and patterns for India's for India, which is indicated in these graphs by the blue line. We have compared it with other countries. So the yellow line is for Vietnam, the red line is for China, the black line is for Indonesia, and the green line is for Brazil. But because there's a lot of material, we are not going to get into comparative analysis right now. The panel A shows the backward participation. Panel B here shows the forward participation. The panel C talks about the two-sided participation. And finally, in panel D, we have a measure called forwardness in GVC participation, which basically indicates the upstreamness of that sector. So it is a measure which we have calculated by subtracting the backward GVC participation from the forward GVC participation and expressing it as a share of overall GVC participation. Now, so in this graph here, we have looked at India's entire manufacturing sector as a whole. And we see that that there is a dominance of backward linkages overall, that is around 25 to 30% of India's exports are dominated by backward linkages here in the latest year for which the data is available. In contrast, the forwardness, the forward GVC participation is around 15% or less than 15% in the latest years. And we also see that there is a decline in forwardness in GVC participation in the years post 2016, which is reflected in panel D as well, where you see a decline in the forwardness. So there is a decline in the upstreamness overall of India's manufacturing sector, and there is some evidence of strengthening of India's backward linkages because there is an increase in the backward GVC participation as well as the two-sided participation, especially in the years post 2016-17, and then there's a sharp increase post 2020. In contrast, if we look at the same graphs for the services sector overall, and this is just for comparison to compare manufacturing and services, because services dominates India's overall value added as opposed to manufacturing. Here we see there is we see the difference is that here in terms of services there is a dominance of forward linkages. So forward linkages occupy around 20% of gross service exports, as opposed to 10% for backward linkages for India. And the certification of Indian exports is clear in this graph here below, where we have graphed the domestic services content in total gross exports. And we see that as opposed to other countries, the blue line is steadily increasing. It is close to 50% in the latest year, and this is the highest among the other countries. So there is a dominance of domestic services content for India's service exports. But we'll go back to the manufacturing sector because that is what is interesting in the Indian case. So what we'll do now is we'll look at it sector by sector. So first we look at the textile and textile products sector, and we look at the backward and forward participation. So textiles are the major employment generating sector in India. Therefore, it is very important in terms of a manufacturing sector in the Indian context. And what we see here is that the extent of backward participation is lower in the textile sector as opposed to other sectors. However, that is not surprising because backward GVC participation is probably not very important in the textile sector. But what we also notice here is that there is a decline in the forwardness and there is a decline in the forward GVC participation in the textile sector post 2016-17, as seen by this graph here. And this is corroborated by by another graph here, where we see that the decline in the forwardness is actually coinciding with the decline in India's global share of value added in textiles. That is also declining post 2017. After an increase here, there is a decline from 2017 onwards. And this decline in the textile industry in recent years has also been highlighted by other scholars in the literature. If we look at the network product sectors now, first we look at the electrical and optical equipment. Here we see that the story is somewhat different from that of textiles. We see that post 2016-17, there is a rise in its backward GVC participation, and correspondingly, there is a steep fall in the forward GVC participation. So there is definitely an indication of strengthening of backward linkages in this sector, not only in the post-COVID period, but also a little bit before that in the post-2017-18 period itself. In fact, currently in the latest years, India ranks second only to Vietnam in terms of backward linkages for electrical and optical equipment. If we look at machinery, another network product sector, we see similar trends. There is an increase in the backward GVC participation post 2016-17, and there is a steeper increase post 2020, followed by and corroborated by a decline in the forwardness of GVC participation in this sector. And finally, we come to the transport equipment sector here, where we see that even though there is an increase in the backward GVC participation and a sharp increase in the two-sided GVC participation here in this graph for transport sectors, indicating there might be some indication of upstreamness in this sector, but there is no such decline in the forwardness index as we saw in the earlier in the earlier sectors, in the earlier network product sectors. So here, and also this may not be very surprising because India does export motor vehicle parts and components to several countries. And the automobile sector in general is kind of within the rest of the sectors, as compared to other sectors, it is kind of a success story. So this may be what is being reflected here in terms of a non-declining forwardness in GVC participation for the transport sector. So overall, if we want to summarize the GVC patterns, we see that India's performance remains below par in terms of its small share in global output and global exports, and there is limited evidence of upgrading along the value chain. However, in recent years, we do see some evidence of increased backward linkage intensity, especially in certain sectors like network products. And this brings us to the role of trade policy, and in particular, the role of tariffs. So, while it is well documented that average Indian tariffs remain higher than most other countries, as we have also plotted in this graph, if you see this blue line, it is also true that in the latest years, in the recent union budgets, we have seen that there is an evidence of recent recalibration of the tariff structure. So if you look at this graph here, we will see that the weighted average tariffs have been brought down from 7% in 2019 to close to 4.6% in 2022. So is there a link between tariffs and this rise, declining tariffs, and this rise in backward GVC participation? And to look into this in a little bit more details, here what we have done is we have plotted the sectoral tariffs and the backward GVC participation. So each dot reflects a country in a particular year. The blue dots indicate India, the yellow dots indicate Vietnam, the red dots indicate China, and so on. We have continued with the same color scheme. And if you look at the graphs here, this graph here, we are talking about the totals, all sectors combined. And in the right hand side of the slide, we have the sectors sectors decomposed. And overall, we see that except for a few sectors where we have slight anomaly, overall what we see is that there is a negative correlation between the tariffs and the backward GVC participation. And this is consistent with empirical literature, because we have seen that tariffs do magnify along a value chain, especially for backward linkages. Now, in the international trade literature, analysts have repeatedly pointed out that India's tariff rates have been very high. And this is, of course, true, as we have seen right now. But it should also be highlighted that macroeconomic policy has caused a real appreciation for most of the periods in 2000. And a very telling example is India's bilateral trade with China in the past year, where the value of trade was USD 113 billion and India's deficit was USD 100 billion. So a real appreciation offsets high tariff rates. So here we have plotted a simple scatter plot of the real effective exchange rate on my y-axis and the GVC participation, backward GVC participation on my x-axis. This is only for Indian industries. And a simple scatter plot shows that this seems to be positively correlated, implying that depreciation might encourage backward GVC participation. However, there is food for thought here in the sense of whether the scale effect of higher exports dominates the cost effect of more expensive imported inputs. To analyze this in a little bit more details, we have come up with an econometric model where we have estimated the determinants of GVC participation for India at the sectoral level. We have the econometric model here where we have regressed the GVC share of industry I in year T on a host of explanatory variables. The first set of explanatory variables captures the sectoral characteristics, which is the value added share of the sector, the capital intensity of the sector, and the labor productivity of the sector. And we have also looked at some policy variables as explanatory variables. We have considered the tariff rate of that sector, the output tariff of the sector, the import openness of the sector, and the real effective exchange rate as explanatory variables. Gamma I, delta T are your usual industry fixed and time fixed effects, and to capture unobserved heterogeneity between industries, we have used the panel fixed effects estimation technique. Our panel data spans for 27 industries, but mostly we have looked at the 13 manufacturing industries for the years 2007 to 2022. So the results are as follows of this regression. In the interest of time, I will focus on the main specification here, which is column 3 here. If you focus on column 3, where our dependent variable is backward GVC share, we find that tariffs turn out to be negative and significant, implying that increasing tariffs leads to a decline in backward GVC participation. The real effective exchange rate is positive and significant, indicating that a depreciation would encourage GVC participation. Labor productivity among sectoral variable turns out to be highly positive and significant in all of the specifications. And finally, what we have here is we also look at the role of industrial policy, where we look at the production-linked incentive schemes, which were introduced in 2020-2021, which was introduced by the central government, where we have sectoral specific fiscal initiatives, which were linked to incremental output and sales for particular products like mobile phones, IT hardware, telecom products, and so on. So to look at whether GVC participation increased in PLI sectors relative to non-PLI sectors, we add a PLI dummy, which takes the value 1 for electrical and optical products category and 0 for and for the years post 2020 and 0 for the rest of the variables for the rest of the years. We interacted with the capital intensity term also to see whether investment in that sector has increased or not. So the results of this are as follows. We keep the rest of the variables as it is. We see that tariffs remain negative and significant. I think the time is up. Can I take 1 minute just to explain this slide?
Please go on, go on.
Yeah, yeah. So we introduced the PLI dummy in our original regression specification, and we see that the PLI dummy turns out to be positive and significant here, indicating that for the electric and optical sector, electronics and optical sector for the years post 2020, there is an increase in backward GVC participation. But more so, what is interesting here is that when we interact the PLI dummy with the capital intensity variable, it turns out to be positive and significant. And it's important to keep in mind that the capital intensity was nowhere significant in anywhere else in our specification. So this kind of indicates that maybe there has been an increase because of incremental output, which is a part of the PLI scheme. To produce that incremental output, the industries had to invest in higher capital. And we also undertake a falsification test here just to see whether I am getting these results by fluke or not. So instead of taking electronic and optical sector, if we take a different sector and a different year, does the interaction term still turns out to be positive and significant? And we see that that is not the case. So that reinforces our faith in the PLI interaction term here. So overall, what we see is that maybe there is a possible effectiveness of PLI, but of course it is too early to tell. The dependence on China is, of course, another factor which we should consider here, that our reliance on China for intermediate inputs is definitely a geopolitical concern, and almost 40% of imported inputs for the electrical and optical equipment sector for India is imported from China. And herein the role of IMEC and the role of pursuing FTAs with other trading partners where trade complementarities exist can be a policy that India can follow to reduce its dependence on China. In conclusion, very quickly, the caveat and future work. So the study does not provide any causal evidence. This was in the interest of time. But in future, disaggregated firm level studies are important to identify exact channels. I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aweisha. Very clear, very good, very on time. Great. And now let's listen to Alessandro what he has to say. And
should I stop sharing my screen?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you.
Alessandro, please.
Yeah, I don't know. Can you see? Okay, great. I try to put full screen.
I'm not able to stop sharing.
But do you see my presentation?
Not yet. And I guess at first, Aweisha should.
So I am unable to stop it from sharing. I don't know why.
Okay.
In share screen, maybe isn't there?
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Okay.
Go on, Alessandro.
Now I'll try to share. No?
Yes.
Okay, great. So here I'll be able to put full screen. Sorry.
Presentation mode, right?
Yeah, this.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So thank you. I'm very glad to have the opportunity to discuss this paper. It's a preliminary paper, but very interesting. And also, I'm very glad to see how some measures that contributed to develop can be used also for quite interesting, very interesting policy relevant work and particularly about India, that is very at the heart of the discussion on reconfiguration of global value chains over the last years, I guess. So let me first say something about the contribution of the paper, summarize a bit. So the contribution is the paper gives a very clear useful analysis of India's GVC participation. There's different measures to detect the different types of participation. There is a rich sectoral dimension, also distinguishing between different types of sectors. And also, it's very interesting this comparison between India and other, especially in large emerging economies. It also combines trade-based and output-based measures, and there are also some very policy dimensions that are explored, in particular the role of tariffs, the role of exchange rates, and industrial policies. There are also some preliminary, I would say, suggested evidence about a geopolitical dimension of vulnerability that is dependency on China's input, in particular in the electronics sector. So key findings. You have seen that India's GVC participation is dominated by backward linkages. There is, from a dynamic point of view, declining in forwardness, so is becoming even more specialized in backward phases of the production and two-sided participation. So it's not only backward, but there is also this other more intermediate dimension of India's sectoral positions, and also in more network products like electronics and machinery. Services also remain one of India's strength. We're talking about service trade. We know that a large part of GVC participation is also indirect participations through services, and it has a very pivotal role, in particular in the case of the Indian economy. For what concerns policy variables, the authors found a negative correlation between backward tariffs and backward GVC participation, which makes sense. I think it is very interesting finding, particularly interesting finding of this work. And also this decline could have helped the increase in integration in downstream production phases. There is also some suggested evidence that policy support can boost backward participation, especially in electronics. And that's also that China's inputs dependency has increased. So let me first say, given that I think that have been these indices about GVC participation has been extensively used in the paper, and I suggest some more other kind of measures and possible metrics that can be used to have a more complete picture of the India's participation to GVCs. So I think that's one thing that could be expanded is the preliminary part, introductory part of the paper. Maybe we will need also to see a bit more traditional, let's say, kind of indicators about India's integration in trade, both on import and export side in general, even more on aggregate GVC participation before going more on the type of participation. So that could happen also to have a more complete picture, and also, how to what extent also the incidence of import-exports and GVC on India's GDP, and also in comparison with other emerging economies. Then there are also what I said just is also to expanding in particular the last part of the paper where the authors are exploring the issue of vulnerability also from external inputs, but you could also think about dependency on the final demand abroad. There are new sets of indicators that are complementary to the one that we developed on GVC participation, especially those developed by Baldwin and Freeman, that use as well input-output table to assess which is the external dependency on specific countries and sectors. And there is a very nice, I put here the reference, very recent working paper by the World Bank that is basically summarizing all types of the literature could be inspire how the authors, how they can extend this section of the paper. Talking about also comparison, I mean, they are meaningful, the countries that the author chose to compare India's position dynamics, but you could also think to have a more comprehensive comparison, but to between India and all emerging and advanced countries. You could also think to compute some kind of similarity index, also take into account these different type of specialization, not only sector specialization or product specialization, but also the upstream, let's say the backward, two-sided and forward specialization, as considering that a sort of different type of sectors, and you can compute some kind of similarity. Fingerprinting is one similarity indicator, so that could be also useful, because it is true that we usually consider downstream phases of production less skill intensive, upstream more sophisticated phases of the production, but it really depends also on the type of sectors. Now, some sectors you think that are more forward, but just because they are dominated by raw materials, or like steel, that are upstream, but they are not really, they are capital intensive, not really very sophisticated. So this type of comparison could give also a more deeper picture of the GVC of India's position. Then you can have some insights also from the comparison between gross output and trade measures that are there, because India is also a very large country as compared, for instance, to Vietnam. So maybe you have less trade as compared to gross output, but you can still have some kind of participation through domestic value chain that are better captured with the gross output indicators, and also comparing absolute values as compared to shares indicators, because especially when you look at dynamic, sometimes shares indicators, given that there is sum to total trade, you are basically overlooking the dynamic of overall trade as compared to GDP or trade in general. And then also could be interesting to have a look at more larger time span, for instance, resorting to different data sources as a new TIVA tables that we had updated, and that goes back to TIVA table go back to then mid-90s. So maybe it could be also useful to have more variability in the regression analysis. As concerned regression analysis, I think that the work that I read is very preliminary, I know, but you could, I think, better clarify. There were some variables. Then another concern is that it is true that it is pure correlation, but given that potentially there are some endogeneity issues and regression, bad controls, reverse causality, in particular, for instance, the role putting value-added shares and also import shares among the explanatory variables. You could have both bad controls and reverse causality. So maybe it also can affect the interpretation of the coefficients. Also on the other variable of interest, for instance, tariffs, exchange rate, or PLI. And so maybe you could resort to at least lag variables sometimes to mitigate some of these issues, for instance. I found very interesting the tariff analysis, and I think that it could be deepened a bit. Probably it's already in the work plan of the authors, but I think that given that GVC participation is also related to intermediate to import of intermediate inputs, you could also differentiate between the tariffs of intermediate goods as compared to final or capital goods also. You could also test the effect on other type of variables like value-added exports, general value-added, because it is true that maybe lowering tariffs allow you to use more imported inputs, but also it could also put more competition of your own value-added. So it would be very interesting to see both-sided if it affects for instance value-added domestic value-added in exports is affected in a different way as compared to GVC participation. And also I think that a lot of the findings also would concern the effect of PLA and are also related to third country tariffs. We know that there was this China-US trade war back in 2018, and also the following years there was a reconfiguration of value chains. Consider the production of Apple that was also reestablished in part of the production was reestablished in India. And also your comparison, in particular, comparison countries, in particular, Vietnam was deeply affected by this reconfiguration. Sometimes also, let me say, is not a true reconfiguration. Given that there are some rerouting, transshipment, especially through Vietnam, that could show up in the data as if it was an increase in GVC participation, but actually are only goods that are rerouted through Vietnam to avoid direct tariffs imposed on Chinese imports by the US. I was also curious about the effect of the depreciation because actually you find a positive effect on backward linkage, but you have two different forces here because when you have depreciation, actually inputs becomes more costly and the exports more competitive. So probably the second effect is prevailing, is why you have a positive effect, but maybe looking also to other components, you could have a better picture of what are the underlying forces. And finally, also talking about fragmentation, India is at very heart of this process. Here I put a map that we use for different works that are collected in this fragmentation report, trade fragmentation report. And India has a neutral country in between the Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc. plays a key role also in the possible reconfiguration of value chains. So maybe you could also use this kind or other types of classification of countries, apart from looking at the role of China, to see how India is reconfiguring the role of India within this reconfiguration of value chains driven by geopolitical forces. For instance, we have seen, I put here some evidence, we have seen that over the last years there was an increase in import share of within block imports as compared to between block imports, but is also differentiated by types of goods. So thank you again for giving me the opportunity to discuss with this very interesting work.
Thank you, Alessandro. Very rich. I think you have given a lot of suggestions and comments. The authors will certainly appreciate them. So now, please post your question in Q&A. We don't have questions so far, so let's go back to the authors. Maybe I add some personal question. One is, of course, Anwesha, you had you stayed perfectly in the time, so but you had to sacrifice some arguments. Ones that a couple of that I would like you to pick up, maybe Ian reply, is the comparison with Vietnam seems to be very interesting because that is a success story, and then that maybe can help you in also discussing the policy recommendation that are maybe implicit in your paper. But of course, the first replies go to the questions that Alessandro raised. So, Anwesha, do you want to start, or Pasquale, or Marta, whoever you want to say? All of you. Anwesha, start. You start,
Yes.
maybe.
Sure. I would really like to thank Alessandro for the excellent comments. I think all of the suggestions that he gave can be incorporated into the paper. I think I mean, a few things that I picked out. I mean, I don't remember each and every point, but a few things which, so I think you spoke about lagged variables. So we did include lagged tariffs in a specification as well. And the results did not change. So lagged tariffs continued to be negative and significant. But maybe we can look at instrumental variables. But again, we did not have that much time to think of an instrument and come up with an instrument at the sectoral level. So we went with the lagged tariff itself. We did undertake a comparison between the trade related measures and the output measures for India. Although I did not do it at the absolute levels, I took shares for both. And what we got is the trends are more or less similar, like at least for electronics and optical sector, I did notice. So although the shares are obviously lower for the output based measures because the denominator is bigger, but the trends are similar in terms of like an increase in the backward GVC participation post 2017-18, and then a decrease in the forward linkages, especially for electronics and the network products is what we are seeing. I did think of the differentiating the tariffs into intermediate capital and final goods as well, but that would I mean, I have to use input-output tables to get there. It would be a very complicated analysis. So maybe I mean, the follow-up of this can be in extending the tariffs in that direction. The role of exchange rates also, I had a discussion with actually Professor Sen regarding this as well, that what exactly is happening, and I think he can give better insights because he's an expert in that area. So I would not comment on the exchange rate part. And I think the classification of countries according to geopolitical regions, like you showed, was really interesting. I did not know such a classification exists, but I'll definitely go back and check that. So thank you so much. Um,
Thank
yeah,
you.
would yeah,
Thank you.
would,
Yeah. Partha, you want to say something as Anwesha?
I mean, just put things in perspective a little bit. I think Alessandro's comments are very relevant, and so India's industry participation has been not very large, and there has actually been deindustrialization of late. I mean, and this sort of predates the new government that we have in place. So under 2012-13 already, the share of industry in the labor force was declining. Then and the China shock came, and we don't have anything on the Trump shock as yet. So these two things are going to contaminate any analysis. But the initial reaction to China was to just remove any contact with China whatsoever, and that's where the iPhones and all came into play. And so in some sense there is a comparative advantage in labor intensive commodities, but we ended up by assembling iPhones and some of the other fairly capital intensive products. If you look at the textile sector, I think in India's success has not been really outstanding in any way. India, Bangladesh has done better, Vietnam has done better, whatever space China has vacated. And here, the old notion that Alessandro talked about, that tariffs on intermediates as opposed to final goods, is very important, because I think it has something to do with the industrial organization in the textile sector in India, where some favored players don't want to lower tariffs in the initial stages of production. So there is something there, although the government is cognizant of this and maybe they will do something. But thank you very much, Alessandro. I think what I just put on record is that there's a lot of churn going on in India's trade, and we are trying to get some kind of a stable picture out of that.
Thank you, Partha. Anwesha referred to you on the commenting on the exchange rate, the role that it plays in this paper, in this analysis.
So you see, when trade people do analysis of international trade flows, they look at India as a very highly protectionist economy, which of course it is. But can you hear me? Yeah,
we hear you.
Yeah. So no, because the electricity here is fluctuating. So sorry about that. But against that is also India has been recipient of large capital flows, financial capital flows, nothing to do with trade, not FDI, but financial capital flows. And India has had something of a Dutch disease problem. So what we have is a huge real appreciation, almost till about 2 years ago, and that would be true for all of the 21st century. So we've brought in the real exchange rate just to account for some of that maybe you may have very high tariff rates, but the real appreciation could swamp that. So it's just an indicator, that's all. Nothing really, we are not swearing by this.
Thank you, Partha. Yes, thank you. Pasquale, you want to add anything, comment? Please.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much, Alessandro, for reading our results, our paper so carefully, and for your comments. I think everything you say is correct, and we should try to take into account your suggestions, both in terms of the metrics, how to measure global value chains, and also in terms of the econometric analysis, statistical analysis. I mean, the analysis that we have presented is mostly descriptive, really, but we are now planning to consider more seriously issues of reverse causality and endogeneity. Could be done using lagged variables, which are not predetermined, help address some of these concerns. But yes, this is, we should be more systematic about how we deal with these issues. No, I just want to say that a global value chain can be really strategic for a country like India. Typically, global value chains are a vehicle for technology transfers. We know that the global value chains are also closely related to domestic investment, to foreign direct investment, both of the greenfield and of the brownfield variety. And they could have a direct impact on employment. And this could be quite critical for a country like India. Now, it's also Partha had mentioned the process of deindustrialization. One of the issues of India is a so-called jobless growth, so that the increase in output is not always matched by a parallel increase in employment, which creates some imbalances in the labor market, in the structure of the Indian economy. And global value chains may have a role to play to stimulate domestic investment. And there too, the relationship could be in both ways, so that global value chains could help sectoral growth, but on the other hand, sectoral growth could also be an attractor for global value chains. So global value chains both stimulate in the sectoral performance, but they can also be attracted to the sectors which are already performing better. So there could be a two-way causality there, which could be explored more in detail. Also, global value chains could have a regional dimension, so it would be important to look at the specific value chains with regional countries, and that could help also insulate India and the regional countries from global shocks. So it could improve the resilience of the Indian economy, of the neighboring economies to global shocks. Also, in the face of the reconfiguration of the global trade flows, which has already started and presumably which will gain momentum given all the upheavals in international trade. It's interesting that you present this picture of geopolitical blocks, but presumably the structure of these blocks is also quite fluid. I'm not sure that in a few years' time we'll still see the United States and Europe as part of the same block, and so things I think will change fast, but and it will affect the structure of global value chains and also more in detail the direction of investment. And so I think yes, global value chains are an important topic, and they can be crucial for the Indian economy and for South Asian economies, for economies of the region. And the analysis we presented is just very preliminary, mostly descriptive, but certainly scope for much further, more detailed work. So thank you, Alessandro, for all your comments and suggestions.
Thank you, Pasquale. So we are close to the end. Alessandro, you want to, reply or rejoin or add anything?
Just maybe a suggestion. I can send also the slides if I can find useful. And no, but what's concerned the distinction between intermediate and I think that if you already have some detail level, I guess 6-digit or something like that tariff lines, you can also simply use broad economic categories, classification of goods. So you don't really need to go through all the input outputs, but even that classification is enough to try to distinguish the two. And just for a quick reply to Pasquale thoughts that I share about geopolitical blocks and reconfiguration. Actually, yes, it's very fluid, and especially in the case of India. Actually, in recent weeks, I had the opportunity to talk with two different think tanks, and that had opposite views about the position of India. One was saying that India will come back quickly on the US aligned countries mainly because also the rivalry with China is too strong to have and a different one that have completely different views. And so in actually we're thinking they were forecasting actually the possibility that the combination of technology and capital from China in combination with resources from Russia and labor abundancy from India gave the opportunity to create a sort of super Ricardo-based comparative advantage value chain structure that could dominate basically. But yeah, it was pretty interesting that there were these completely opposite views about the future of India's position in this geopolitical fragmentation. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you also for sharing with us these interesting insights. I think we are closing. Just, 10 seconds reply from each of you, what you take from this study on India development in the global economy and also in the global scene. What is your takeaway? What is your very, very rough and rapid and tentative conclusion? We want to start with Alessandro, maybe?
Yeah, I said that it is. I mean, it is. Their long avenue to. It was super interesting the fact that policy is relevant. Things are changing very quickly because we usually take these kind of things as structural conditions and especially in recent years, seeing such a quick changes also in the positioning in some sectors and countries. So it's super interesting to see which will be the evolution of these trends. And thank you again.
Pasquale, you have your thought?
No, just to follow up on what Alessandro just said, to remark that India really occupies a special place in the global geopolitics. And as Alessandro said, it could really go either way, and it can also take advantage of its position to form alliances with both blocs and choose both, as it were. And I suppose India has the capacity to do that. So maybe both your colleagues in the think tanks to whom you spoken, maybe they can both be correct in their own way.
Thank you, Pasquale. Partha, you certainly have an insight.
Yes.
View.
Thank you. Just, the the geopolitics and India's trade is really very complicated, because for all practical purposes, India had tried to decouple from China. Although we were very reliant on China, we wanted to join the US-led coalition against China. But then Trump comes along and he does, puts 50% tariffs on some India's, labor-intensive, like fisheries and things like that. So India has had to scurry back to China, saying that, look, were we being rude to you? No, we were not being rude. We'll be your best friends. So right now we don't know, because you see, in India, China, and Russia, as a production plan is fine, but where do you sell that output? Because China has the commanding heights of selling the output and to everyone in the world. So it's really not a very happy situation. But the one positive thing is that capital flows to India have eased, and therefore the currency is showing some signs of depreciation. And if that depreciation was accompanied by a thought-out industrial policy, then I think it would be quite nice. But what Krugman Krugman used to call the beachhead effect, but we don't really have that. We don't have the industrial policy. We have the exchange rate depreciation, and that's not enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Partha. Finally, but Anwesha, the closing words.
Thank you. So I would like to pick up from where Professor Sen stopped. So he mentioned about industrial policy. I think renewal of industrial policy. There's a renewed interest in. I mean, in between, industrial policy was just brushed under the carpets, but now there is a renewal in industrial policy. And in this respect, I think there is something. So the Indian industries also face something called an inverted tariff. So we have the tariffs of the average intermediate inputs being higher than the average final tariff. So the role of this tariff inversion, and in the latest few budget announcements, the finance ministry has tried to correct this in certain sectors, especially for mobile phones, and we did see an increase in mobile phone exports. So this is also maybe some food for thought as to how to recalibrate the tariff structure as well.
Thank you very much. We are all looking forward to the final version of the paper. It will be very rich, very interesting, as this webinar shows, I think. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to the discussant for a wonderful seminar, and to the participants. We will continue our journey through contemporary India next year. So please stay tuned. But for the time being, for this year, the webinars are over. And so I wish you all the best for the seasonal holidays.